Well, good morning. It's good to see all of you and all of you joining us online as well. Great to have you, and hope I'm sure you've all got your Christmas shopping all done and ready to go. I might even start this week sometime. Yeah. Christmas time is an amazing time of the year. And, it's a time where we see lots of joy, and the focus on things is very good. I think it can also be a bittersweet time of the year as well, can it? One of the things I think I've noticed over the years is this pattern that it's also a time that, just because of the focus and stuff, it can be a time that can be difficult if you're going through something difficult, or if you're struggling with loneliness. It has a way of highlighting that. And we will all be around people this Christmas season that are going to have different struggles at different moments. And we may not always know what those are, but can I just say, I know from experience, there's going to be more people than we realize going through just difficult moments. And so in this series where we talk about a role to play, and we're thinking about Christmas and Christmas coming up, I think there's a larger role for us to play in a really practical way, just all around us this Christmas season. And that's what I want to talk about here a little bit. How many of you have heard the phrase, or even used the phrase, you got to get back up on the horse, right? Or back in the saddle. Yeah, most of you. Okay, yeah. I heard that from my parents constantly. I know it may be because I grew up in the mountains out in Marana, but you all have heard that, right? And so when you think about that phrase, like you got to get back up on the horse. And it's that idea that there's just going to be times in life that you get knocked off the horse, and finding a way to just get back up on that horse and move forward. Like, that's really important. But what happens when you get knocked off that horse and you're just like, I'm a little dizzy and I don't know where the horse went, and I just, and you're just struggling with that a little bit. And so in some ways, this message, I want it to just be this really simple message. This won't be a morning where I'm going to try and unpack some deep theological principle. I just think going into this Christmas season, I want to take a moment and remind us and kind of call us towards something that probably all of you already know. This isn't a morning to teach something brand new, but just to kind of call us to something that would just be really good, because there's this kind of role that we can play that at different moments is just helping somebody get back in the saddle again when they've been knocked off. Here, maybe 3-4 weeks ago, I don't remember exactly how long it was, I got a few texts, and I'm not the best at answering my texts right away. I lose my phone or leave it on airplane mode, this sort of thing. But all of a sudden, I got this string of texts from my son and from my wife and from my daughter, and it was because my daughter was climbing, and she was in an indoor gym, rock climbing, and it's one where you're not belayed like on a rope. You can only climb 8-10 feet high, and they've got big mats, so you just climb up and you fall off, and climb up and fall off, right? Well, she fell, and just kind of fell awkwardly. And kind of as she fell, she rolled over her arm, and it bent her arm in a way that your arm's not supposed to be bent. And I was just getting all these calls about it. And then by the time I realized this, now it's okay, she's in an ambulance on the way to the ER because she's hurt her arm. And at first I thought it was because she hurt her fingertip, because maybe a week before that, she broke the little bone on the tip of her pinky, and I'm just going to the ER for the, whatever. But then I get this X-ray, okay, and I'm going to show you this X-ray. This is an X-ray of her arm right there. Look, yeah. So you noticed the same thing I did, didn't you? Yeah. I'm no doctor, but I knew that's the elbow. That's not how your elbow's supposed to work. So then I was like, oh man. So get to the ER, and she's doing well, and she was an EMT for a while, and so she understood everything's going on, all this stuff, and finally get some good painkillers in her, and they get the x-rays, and they get everything going. And then there's this moment like where the nurses and the doctors kind of clear out, like it's gonna be a while before we get, reset it. But all of the emergency stuff, all the things that need to happen fast and right, it's all done. And so it was just her brother and I at that point, just sitting in there. And then when it all gets calmed down, guess what happens? Now all of a sudden the tears came, right? Because now the kind of the immediate danger is gone, right? And the tears came. And she had hurt her ankle like a few months before that and wasn't able to climb for a long time. And now she's like, they're never gonna let me climb again. And the tears are coming down. Like my whole life is a wreck at this point. She hadn't even started the job. She had just gotten a brand new job that was gonna start 3 days after this. She called it her first adult job, right? Because she finished her degree and she was working at Starbucks. And so she quit Starbucks and went out and got a real adult job. And she's gonna start it in 3 days. And she's like, and now this happened. And you could just tell, she's just gotten knocked off the horse, right? And she's just thinking about all this stuff in the moment, and it just feels like it's the end of the world. It's just but it's not, right? But it's a moment that she's gotten knocked off the horse. And we're all gonna have people around us at different moments. They're gonna get knocked off their horse, just like every one of you have been knocked off the horse a time or two, right? And there's this role that we get to play at these moments where it's just maybe there's something I can do to just help someone help themselves get back on a horse, right? And if you talked with anyone that came in the service before this, they might have said, we talked a lot about horses today. And I apologize, but it's my metaphor for the day, right? And there's this simple thing of how do we help people in those moments? And just watching her struggle in that moment, it was so real to her. And you feel for people that in a moment there's someone you care about and they're going through something. Maybe it's someone and they've retired, and for them, all they could think about is, I just want to retire, But they're one of these goal-oriented people, and their career, everything was there. And now they've retired, and it's oh my gosh, I don't know what to do with my life. And it's they got knocked off the horse in the weirdest way. And this is a new thing for them. And all of a sudden they're just in this weird spot in this. Or maybe you have a friend or someone and they've lost a job. And right, nothing better than going into the Christmas season unemployed. And you just feel for them. And they're just man, this hurts in this moment. Or maybe it's a couple that and they're struggling with infertility. And it just feels they'll never have a child, and they've tried and tried, and you just see the overwhelmment just washing over the top of them in all of this. And when we get to Christmas is wonderful as it is, sometimes magnifies those moments, and we can find ourselves feeling more discouraged or more alone, or feeling more overwhelmed. And so as we enter in Christmas here, I just want to encourage all of us that maybe we keep our eyes and our hearts open to maybe who's around us that just got knocked off their horse, and how do we help them just get back in the saddle again. And again, just a simple sermon this morning, but one that I think is good for us all to hear, because there is a role that we can play that is important. And to unpack this, I want to look at a character in the Bible that is actually in the genealogy of Jesus. It's how I landed on this. I was actually kind of going a different direction in this, and I started going through the genealogy of Jesus leading up to the birth of Christ, and came across this one character in the story, and just as I thought about it more, kept coming back to this. But his name is Boaz. And I'm sure like he's not the most well-known character, right, in all the Bible. If we were to do a little survey and you said, what are your 10 favorite people in the Bible? Boaz probably wouldn't get mentioned too often in there. In fact, most of you probably weren't thinking, man, I hope Glenn talks about Boaz at church today, right? It's just, but there's this interesting quality to him that I want you to see because he actually steps into this kind of role for a couple of people that I want to talk about this morning. And his story, so you find his name a couple of times in the Gospel of Matthew as you're going through the genealogy of Jesus. But his story actually goes all the way back to the book of Ruth. It's a little bitty book in the Old Testament, and it's this story that is a really precious story. It's one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament, but it is a story that starts with a lot of loss. So let me just set up the story because we don't get to Boaz until we get to like a third of the way through the story. The story, it's meant to highlight a life that goes through loss that just gets stacked upon loss, upon loss, upon loss. So there's this family living in Bethlehem and famine hits and they've got to move. And so there's this kind of loss. They've got to leave their homeland behind. They've got to leave their property behind because of this famine and they can't afford to stay there. And the only place that they can go where there's not a famine going on, close enough they can get there, is the country of Moab, which in many respects at this time in history would be kind of the enemies of Israel. So they're going into a foreign land where they're not going to be readily welcome and they're going to have to make a new life for themselves over there and they don't know how long this famine's going to start. And they get over there and they have a couple of sons. And so it seems really good at first. And their sons get married. And the story begins to center around the wife. Her name is Naomi. And one of the things that happens there is her husband dies. So now it's loss from the famine. They move over and just when you think things are going to go well, now she loses her husband. And you can imagine what that is like. But then she loses one of her sons. And then she loses her other son. And you just feel the loss stacking up in this thing. And now she is in the land of Moab. And really probably all she has in terms of deep relational connections are her two daughter-in-laws who have also lost their husbands. And so here she is. And for her to be in a foreign land as a widow and old enough that she's probably not going to be able to remarry, it's like, and when my daughter-in-laws remarry, which she wants them to do, I don't get to go with them, right? They're going to start whole new families. And so I'll become destitute here. I've got to go back to Israel. I've got to go back to Bethlehem where my tribe, my clan, where I've got relatives back there because I am a Hebrew. Like I'll be at least at some level be taken care of there. So she's got to now leave. And this is probably after a decade or two of being away. She's got to go back and she's getting ready to leave maybe the two most precious people in her life that are still alive in this. And so there's this conversation that takes place where she is now trying to say to them, like, I've got to go, but you need to stay here because the last thing you need to do as a widow, like a young widow, is travel back to a foreign land that you're not a part of in this. That's not going to work out for you very well in all of this. And I want to read you one part of this. So this is found in Ruth, the book of Ruth, chapter 1. And if you flip in your Bibles, you find the book of Judges, which is a larger book, a little easier to find. Ruth is right after that. Or for most of you, you're on your phone. So you can just say, hey, Siri, go to Ruth, and you'll be there. Here's what she says, is she's in this conversation with her two daughter-in-laws after she's lost her husband and both of her sons. And it's verse 19. So the two women went until, I'm sorry, I read the wrong one. Let's do this. Well, let's go ahead and go to 19, but I'm going to speed up the story a little bit here. And this is after her and one of her daughter-in-laws by the name of Ruth, which the book is named after. Ruth refuses to stay and is like, I'm going with you. I'm not going to let you travel all the way back all alone. You're too precious to me, and I'll make the sacrifice. And so she does. And so now we pick up the story in verse 19, where they're now going back to Bethlehem in here. And this is after decades. And it says this: so the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, and this is the women in Bethlehem, the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" Right? Because she's been gone for so long. And it's important to note, Naomi means like sweetness or pleasantness. Like, is this Naomi? Is this the woman that, like, is this really her from so long ago? Look at verse 20. She says, "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter," right? Just like I'm coming back, not because, everything's going well and it's time to come back and settle back at home. It's because everything has been a loss and it just feels like God has been against me, right? And sometimes when you get knocked off the horse, it feels like, is God against me? Is God is he messing with me? Is he have I done something to offend him? And is he not like me anymore? What's going on? And that's Naomi. And I'm sure you have people in your life and you've watched them at that place where they're just struggling in this. And next, the narrator does something really interesting that I want you to notice. So as the story has gone along, we absolutely know that Ruth, right, her daughter-in-law, is a Moabite. But the narrator has never called her a Moabite. But we know this and we understand this. And so look at what the narrator does at this point. This is the beginning of verse 22. So Naomi returned, and this is how the chapter ends out. So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth, the Moabite. And the narrator does this for a reason in this. The narrator is drawing our minds, highlighting our minds of what this means. Ruth, as a Moabite, is going to show up in Bethlehem, right? A town that is very Jewish in every way. Everyone would have immediately known, just by the way Ruth was dressed, by the complexion of her skin, her hair, they all would have known this is a Moabite. She's from that group of people that are like our enemy. And the narrator's wanting us to know, Ruth loves Naomi so much, right? She's showing up, but her world is changing, right? As she shows up in this moment. And I think part of what the narrator is also doing is it draws our attention to her. It lets us empathize with her. And so as we walk through this story a little bit, let Ruth and Naomi represent the person you care about. As you think about who's that person in your life right now, and you're just like, man, they're in a tough stretch. There's difficulties going on, in their family or in their extended family. There's difficulties at work. There's difficulties with their health. There's the challenge that's just pushed them back on their heels or knocked them off their horse. As we go through this story, just let Ruth and Naomi just remind you of that person. Because what happens when they show up is they show up on the property of Boaz. And think of what he has. Think of it as an estate or like a big ranch or a big farm. He was a leader of like a clan or a tribe. And at this point in their history, there was a very particular role that some men were given that were leaders of different tribes or whatever. And there wasn't an exact formula of who got this title or this role, but it was a common one, and it was usually with a leader of a family. And it was called a goel. A goel is the word in Hebrew that is used for this. And it comes from the Hebrew word redeem. So there's a Hebrew word redeem that's like gol. And so a goel is, it gets translated like in your Bibles, probably is like a kinsman redeemer would be like maybe the best way to translate this word. And this was a role. And the reason I want to talk about Boaz is I want you to watch how he lives this role out with Naomi and Ruth, because in a lot of ways, in really simple ways, every one of you can be a goel. You can be a kinsman redeemer with someone around you. This role, it's interesting how the Jews actually created this very unique role. They went back to the Torah, and there's a section of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, there's a section in there, and part of it's in Leviticus, and part of it's in Deuteronomy, and it's known as the Holiness Code, the Holiness Code. And the Holiness Code contained a few of these like commands or rules where it talked about redeeming someone. So if someone, let's say, lost all of their property, they fell on really, really hard times, that there could be someone that would come along and say, I want to help redeem you. You lost your place in the community. You lost your namesake. And so we'll buy back your property and give it to you so that you can be reestablished. Or if someone was, and usually for financial reasons this could happen, they could be pulled into a kind of like financial slavery. And it would be like, you could, a kinsman could buy you out of that. And even if someone else owned the property, the Torah would say, but if someone wants to buy them out, whoever owns the property, they've got to sell it to them at that point. Or it would be to redeem someone's namesake. So if someone, let's say there was a family and the husband died before he had a male heir, right? All of that man's holdings, that family's holdings and land and everything would end up going to whoever the widow married next. And the man's name would like become extinct. It would end. And so part of the Holiness Code said, like, if there's 2 brothers and one of them dies before they have a male heir, the other brother has to marry his sister-in-law. And so that's the application for this morning. Not really, okay? I'm not gonna ask you to go marry relatives out of what we're gonna learn here, right? There will be some cultural adaptation that we will do this morning that I think will hold true to Scripture on this. But what would happen is, so then the brother would marry his brother's widow, and the first male son that they had would take on that man's brother's name. And when that boy grew up and became a man and would get married, he would take the entire estate and everything that the one man's brother originally had and take that name so the man's brother's name and property, everything would continue. And they called that redeeming this thing. And it's like bringing someone back to this place of redemption when maybe they had lost everything. Maybe it could be even reputation. And there's kind of this redeeming thing where you could help somebody in this. Boaz was a kinsman redeemer. So he was one of these people that had this role within his tribe as a leader. And so the story begins to unfold as Ruth and Naomi show up in Bethlehem, and they just kind of land on the first farm or ranch or however you want to think of it, that they come to, and it happens to be one that belongs to Boaz. And Boaz, it says that he's coming from Bethlehem, and he comes from town, and he comes in, and he notices right away, like, who's that woman working in my field? And there would have been all of these women working in the field, and they would follow the men as they were doing this harvesting. And it's called gleaning. And the parts that would drop, widows or the poor, or they could pick all of this up, and it would be theirs, even though they didn't own the field. And Ruth is out there working in this field. And remember, she's a Moabite. And so she probably would have stood out at that point. And it's important to understand that she, unlike any of the other Hebrew women, she would have had no rights to that. But here's what you begin to see with Boaz. The moment he notices this and realizes, there's a foreigner here. And whatever her story is that brought her here, I bet it's a rough one. Because Moabites don't just show up here for vacation time, right? That's not a thing. And so his immediate reaction is one of kindness. In fact, he actually instructs his men that they are to allow her to take all that she wants to take. He even provides protection for her because the Hebrew women, again, part of that culture, there would have been a protection provided to them as being Hebrew that wouldn't necessarily have transferred to her. But he says to his men and to his foremen, you make sure that no one takes advantage of her. You make sure that she's not harassed and that she's protected. And at the very least, there's this kind of role that any of us can step into, a moment where there's someone that's vulnerable for whatever reason. And it's just caring, right? It can be as simple as just, there's someone who's been through something difficult. We'll just provide a meal, right? We'll speak up for them in a moment here. But he doesn't stop there. As Boaz begins to learn her story, there's this really precious moment where he realizes what she's done for a Hebrew woman, and he goes out of his way to encourage her. If you look in Ruth chapter 2, look at verse 11. Verse 11, he shows up and he engages in this conversation, and she's just like, thank you so much. Like you have been more kind to me and generous than I can imagine. And then Boaz replies, verse 11, I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. How you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. And it's this really sweet moment where he's just like, can I just say, I know things aren't easy right now. I know this is difficult. But I see a kind of character in you that's really pretty special. Because, right, Naomi, she was in your shoes in Moab. She was the foreigner. She was the one that would be easy to give no regard to. She would be the easy one to look at and make a scapegoat. She was the easy one to look at and say, I've got lots of people to worry about and lots of mouths to feed, but I don't have to worry about her. But you did, to the point that you had a mom and a dad. There was a farm. You had a guarantee of being taken care of. But you have the kind of character that you looked after one of my tribesmen. And I want you to know that I noticed that. And it's just, there's this moment where you don't see a lot of this in ancient literature, when there is a man who goes out of his way to encourage and highlight the character of a woman. But Boaz does here. He goes out of his way to do that. And in a way, that's kind of a kinsman redeemer, right? That like maybe other people don't see it, but I see it in you. I want to redeem this. I want to make sure people see and understand your character, this good thing about you. And imagine for a moment how those encouraging words must have landed in the ears and heart of Ruth. Like when you get knocked off your horse, isn't it nice to just hear something encouraging in a moment? And that's part of what Boaz does here in this. And it's not just that. Boaz also comes along, and there's a moment where he becomes a kind of advocate. He goes out of his way to do this. And again, this would very much be the role of a kinsman redeemer, to be an advocate for someone who's in a difficult situation or just things have turned against them, or whatever it is. So he goes out and he figures out who the closest tribal or clan leader of Naomi there is there in Bethlehem. So he's gonna go out, he's a kinsman redeemer, and what he does is he's like, okay, who's the other kinsman redeemer that Naomi would fall under? Like, given her husband and his name and family line, where's the nearest kinsman redeemer that would actually, right, by Torah, be responsible for making sure that Naomi is taken care of? And he goes out and he finds who this guy is, meets him in the city of Bethlehem, and there's like, it would be an area near the city gates where all the kinsmen redeemers would meet and they would discuss business. It'd be like just like a civic area where they'd go and do this. And he finds this guy and he goes, hey, I have someone that's, living on my farm right now that's gonna need some help. And her name is Naomi, and she's from the family of so-and-so, and that would be under your tribe. And I just wanna encourage you, right, that can you go and fulfill your role and redeem her, which would mean there's property that Naomi and her husband left behind, and it would be this kinsman redeemer's job to go and find that property, probably pay for that property, help Naomi get set up in that, if she doesn't get married, it's to make sure that she's enfolded somehow in a family where she's gonna be taken care of. And this other kinsman redeemer says, yes, like, I'll do that, like, not a problem. And then he goes on and he explains this, and this is found in Ruth chapter 4. Look at Ruth chapter 4. Because Boaz didn't have to do this, but who has rights to what Torah describes as getting help to be redeemed? Naomi does, right? But who wouldn't have any rights to that? Ruth. She's not Jewish. She didn't belong to this clan, right? Boaz doesn't have to ensure anything on this, but look at verse 5. And this is a conversation with Boaz and this other kinsman redeemer. Then Boaz said, on the day that you buy the land from Naomi, in other words, because he's going to buy that land for Naomi that would have been lost, you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite. Oh, this is new news to the other kinsman redeemer. Acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. In other words, and here's how this would have worked. Because of Ruth's age, she was younger and still like childbearing years. You've got to marry Ruth is the idea in this. So that she can have potentially a son that will carry on the name and will take ownership of all of this land. Look at verse 6. Here's the response of the other kinsman redeemer. At this, the kinsman redeemer said, then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do that, right? And here's a simple reason why. He's saying, I get it. I'm obligated to do this for Naomi. But if I do this for this Moabite woman, right, I'm gonna spend all of this money up front, buy this land, then over the next, let's say she gets pregnant right away. It'll be a decade, 2 decades, maybe longer, before her children, her firstborn son is old enough to operate this farm, this ranch all by himself. And you know what happens when he reaches that age? It's his inheritance. I have to give it to him. So for decades, I am going to invest money into making sure that this land, the farm works and is viable. And that's after I've paid for it. And then just give it away. Oh, I can't do that. You do that. And Boaz does. It's this moment where Boaz is like, I'm not gonna let Naomi and Ruth, right? They go together in this thing. And I'm not going to make sure that Naomi is provided for and then just let things slide with Ruth. I'm gonna be a kinsman redeemer to Ruth as well. And here's why Boaz makes his name into the New Testament, right? Because there would have been hundreds, maybe thousands of kinsmen redeemers in the history of Israel. And as far as we know, I don't know that there's another kinsman redeemer named in the Old Testament or in the New Testament in this way. Here's why. He chooses to be a kinsman redeemer when he doesn't have to be. For the person he's not obligated to be, he does it not out of obligation, he does it because he cares. And I just think that's such a great lesson this Christmas season, to just look at this and just say, who's the person around us that needs a kinsman redeemer? And maybe there's no obligation on your part to do anything for them, but they just got knocked off their horse, and maybe you're just the right person at the right time to just help them. And so let me just close out and just offer a couple of practical ways, okay? Because probably it's not gonna mean marrying one of your relatives, all right? We just set that aside, right? There are some better ways that we can do this, and some ways that are really simple. And when you think about this, going back to this thing, how often is there, someone who goes through life and it's like they get knocked off their horse, and they've heard, like I heard, like, just get back in the saddle, get back in here. And you're like, okay, I'm dizzy, I'm a little concussed. I don't even see my horse. Where's my horse? I'm looking around, and I'm bleeding and hurt, and I can't find my horse. And how nice it is if someone comes up and says, hey, I've got 2 horses. I'll loan you a horse, I'll actually help you get up in the saddle, and maybe I'll ride with you for a little bit, right? That's all this is. And like I said, I'm not gonna teach you anything new here, but can I encourage you in it? And here are some ways. One, sometimes you can play that role of a goel or a kinsman redeemer in just reminding someone of what matters most, right? Maybe you've got that older person in your life. Maybe it's an older parent and they've retired, and you can just see like retirement, right? They were that like high-powered person and all the things they're gonna accomplish, and then they go into retirement, and it's like, what? I lost all my meaning in life. All my meaning was like locked up in my job, and I see that a lot today. And sometimes just reminding them of what matters most can have a way of showing them like there's still profoundly meaningful purposes in your life. Your purpose in life didn't retire when you retired from your job, right? In fact, maybe you will find that there are purposes and reasons that are actually more important. And sometimes someone just needs someone to remind them of that, to help them see what matters. Maybe there's someone in your life and they're coming into the Christmas season and they've just gone through a really hard breakup. Maybe it was a marriage, maybe it was a dating relationship, maybe it was a close friendship, and they're just hurting or they're feeling alone. And just to remind them, like, this isn't the end of the world. This moment that feels big, and without lessening that, can I just help you see that bigger picture? I know the x-ray looks bad, and I know it hurts right now, and I know you start a new job in 3 days, and but it's not the end of, like it's happened to me. Because you're a Barteau. I had to remind her a few times. You're actually going to dislocate other joints before your life is over. You're going to break other bones, and you're going to get hurt. I mean, right? And she starts laughing a little bit. It's like, yeah, you're of my lineage, right? And we get hurt because that's how we do life. I don't know, right? It's just, and reminding her of that bigger picture, that someday you will look back on this probably sooner than later, and you're gonna laugh at this. You'll see it in a different light. Help them see that bigger picture. Maybe it's a young person, and maybe that they're struggling with something. Maybe they grew up in a way where failure was not okay, making mistakes was not okay, and something happened in that moment, and just giving them a bigger picture or reminding them something. It could be could be huge, maybe even a small way. Like this happened to me. So there's a young man in our neighborhood, in our cul-de-sac that I have watched grow up over the years, and he loves doing mechanical things, and he's now old enough that he's bought his own power tools, okay? And he'll come over to my house. I'll be in my garage working away, and he'll come over there, and he's like, "What are you working on?" And I'm, showing him how to use power tools or whatever. And he tried to fix one of his own power tools, and he broke it. He made it worse. And in his mind, it was like the end of the world. And I'm thinking, it's not the end of the world. And I'm trying to say, it's not the end of the world. And he's like, and he had this image of me that like, you've never broken any of your power tools or made a mistake. And I was like, whoa, back up. Can I just tell you the 1,000 ways I've broken things trying to fix them? And he's like, really? I go, yeah, all those parts that I have to fix stuff, those parts came from things I broke. That's where those parts came from in that moment. And I told him, I said, I've got this basic rule. Until you've made a mistake, until you've made your 10,000th mistake on something, you really haven't learned much yet. Like at about 10,000 mistakes or problems, you're really starting to get smart. So you got 9,900 and something to go here on this. It's gonna be okay. And it was just a little bit of perspective to a young person that just gave him a totally different outlook in that moment. And I promise you, you have these moments, and maybe there's that young person and they've never seen you as struggling with something that they're struggling with. And to have a vulnerable moment where you admit to some struggle or something difficult, you may do something precious in their life. Lastly here, there might be a moment that you get to advocate for someone. In our world, it can be as simple as you've got a friend, and maybe, I think about this. How many of you know someone who, because of medical issues or whatever's going on, they're making, talk about 10,000, they're making 10,000 calls to the insurance company, to the doctor, and trying to get files to here, to there. And and between what they're going through and then the red tape on trying to get the help they need, it can just be overwhelming. And what would it be like to just, maybe you're having coffee with them and you're just like, maybe I can make a phone call for you. Maybe there's something I can help you with as you're trying to sort through all that paperwork. And it's just a moment to advocate for them. And it's the simplest role, but sometimes, especially around Christmas, there's a way you can just step into somebody else's life and get them back in the saddle and on their way. And what a blessing it would be for you to do that. So go be that this Christmas season. I'm gonna close this in prayer. And as I do here, I wanna just say, those of you who are visiting or new or a guest here, it is so good to have you here. I'm gonna be right over here in this section by these tables you see over there. I would love it if you'd come by and just shake my hand. I'd love to welcome you personally here this morning. And if you have thought about maybe volunteering for one of our Christmas services, I want to encourage you to do that. It is you will love it, and you will make a difference for someone else. If you want to sign up for something, or if you have questions about anything around volunteering for our Christmas services, go right up at Meet Up at the West, and there'll be some wonderful people that can help you over there. Why don't you stand and let me close us in prayer this morning. Let me pray. Father, I just thank you for Boaz and the example that he gives us of someone who cares and makes a difference, not because he's obligated to, but just because he's taking on your heart and your attitude. And I pray that you just infuse us with your heart. And we pray this in your son's name. Amen. Have a great morning, and we'll see you next Sunday.